Imagine for a moment that you wake up in a room where the air smells of boiled cabbage and old rag mats. You walk over to the window, and what you see is not the hustle and bustle of a vibrant city, but a landscape of ruins, peeling buildings, and gigantic posters watching you with a fixed, inescapable gaze. That face, belonging to a man of about 45 with a heavy black mustache and ruggedly handsome features, follows you everywhere. Beneath the image, a phrase repeats like a hypnotic mantra: "Big Brother is watching you." It is not just a slogan, it is the physical, biographical, and spiritual reality of your existence. The year is 1984, or at least that is what Winston Smith, our protagonist, believes, because in this world, time has become a malleable mass, and memory is a crime punishable by vaporization, which is the technical term for the total erasure of a person's existence, both physically and documentarily. This work by George Orwell is not simply a novel, it is a cautionary artifact, a distorted mirror reflecting our deepest fears about power, language, and the loss of individuality. To understand the magnitude of what Orwell left us, we must first travel to the source, to the mind of a man who wrote these pages while his own body was disintegrating from tuberculosis on a remote, cold island in Scotland. Eric Blair, better known by his pen name George Orwell, was no armchair theorist. He was a man who had seen the face of fascism in the Spanish Civil War and understood that danger did not come from only one side of the political spectrum, but from any system that placed power above the truth. His experience on the front lines, where he saw how propaganda transformed defeats into victories and heroes into traitors overnight, sowed the seeds of what we now know as the universe of 1984. This historical context is fundamental because the novel was published in 1949, just as the world was trying to catch its breath after the Second World War, only to realize that a new shadow, that of the Cold War, was beginning to cover the map. Orwell was not literally predicting the future, but rather performing a logical extrapolation of the trends he already saw in his present. The author introduces us to Winston Smith, a 39-year-old man who works at the Ministry of Truth. His job is, paradoxically, to manufacture lies. Winston is dedicated to rectifying the past, altering old newspaper articles to match the party's current predictions. If the party promised that the chocolate ration would not fall below 30 grams and then lowered it to 20, Winston must find the original record and change it so it appears the party always predicted the ration would be 20 grams. This task introduces us to the central concept of the work, the mutability of the past. If all records say the same thing and all memories are suppressed, the lie becomes the truth. But Winston keeps a dangerous secret. He has bought a diary, a forbidden object, and has begun to write in it. This act of writing is his first declaration of independence, the first step toward his own destruction. Writing here functions as an anchor of reality in a sea of constant falsehoods. Winston writes for a future that may never come, attempting to preserve a shred of coherence in a world that has embraced organized insanity. As Winston progresses in his silent rebellion, he meets Julia, a young woman who appears to be a fervent party follower, but turns out to be a pragmatic rebel. Their romantic relationship is not just a romance, it is a political act. In a system that seeks to channel all emotional energy into the worship of the leader, personal love and sexual desire are acts of insurrection. The party seeks to abolish the orgasm because it understands that private pleasure saps the collective hysteria necessary to maintain control. Sex, for Winston and Julia, becomes a battlefield. But this challenge to the system inevitably leads us to another crucial aspect of the work's deconstruction, the very structure of the totalitarian state of Oceania. Oceania is governed by INGSOC, which is short for English Socialism in Newspeak, the official language the party is designing to limit the range of thought. The architecture of power is divided into 4 ministries whose names are a cruel mockery of their actual functions. The Ministry of Truth deals with news, entertainment, education, and the fine arts, in other words, propaganda. The Ministry of Peace concerns itself with war. The Ministry of Love is the center of torture and brainwashing. And the Ministry of Plenty is responsible for famines and economic scarcity. This semantic inversion is what Orwell calls doublethink. Doublethink is the ability to hold 2 contradictory beliefs in one's mind simultaneously and accept both of them. It is the ultimate tool of psychological control because if you can convince someone that 2 + 2 = 5, you have broken their connection to objective reality and made them completely dependent on whatever version of reality power decides to impose. To understand this fully, we must look at the three-party slogans that adorn the walls of London. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. Let's analyze the first one. War is peace. In the universe of 1984, the world is divided into three great superpowers: Oceania, Eurasia, and Eastasia. These powers are in perpetual war, but it is a war that none can win nor wants to end. The function of war is not territorial conquest, but the consumption of industrial production surpluses without allowing the general standard of living to rise. If the population lived in abundance and had time to think, they would eventually realize that the ruling elite is unnecessary. Therefore, war keeps society in a state of constant deprivation and fear, which guarantees internal stability. War is peace because it ensures the social order never changes. The second slogan, freedom is slavery, suggests that the individual who is free is doomed to die, as all human beings are mortal. But if the individual submits totally to the party, if they merge with the collective, then they become immortal and all-powerful because the party is eternal. Finally, ignorance is strength means that the inability of the masses to understand the mechanism of their own oppression is what allows the system to remain strong and unmovable. This manipulation of language hurls us directly into an even deeper abyss, the creation of newspeak. Narrative and linguistic experts, such as those who study the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis on how language shapes thought, find in 1984 the most extreme example of linguistic determinism. The goal of newspeak is not to add words but to eliminate them. If you eliminate the word freedom, the concept of freedom will cease to exist in people's minds because they will lack the cognitive tools to think about it. If you can only say that something is good or ungood, you lose the nuances of criticism, aesthetic appreciation, and dissent. Newspeak seeks to reduce thought to an instinctive grunt of obedience, eliminating any possibility of complex thinking. This leads us to reflect on how contemporary power sometimes uses euphemisms to soften harsh realities, such as calling the death of civilians collateral damage or mass layoffs workforce adjustments. Orwell warns us that when language is corrupted, thought is also corrupted. But the deconstruction of the work would not be complete without analyzing the figure of O'Brien, the inner party member whom Winston mistakenly believes is an ally of the resistance. O'Brien is one of the most fascinating and terrifying villains in world literature because he is not a vulgar sadist or a blind fanatic. He is a deeply lucid intellectual who perfectly understands the nature of power. In the final part of the novel, when Winston is captured and taken to the Ministry of Love, O'Brien becomes his torturer and, strangely, his teacher. This is where Orwell elevates the work to a metaphysical dimension. O'Brien explains that the party does not seek power to do good, nor for money, nor for luxury. The party seeks power exclusively for the sake of power itself. It is the power to inflict pain and humiliation upon another human being. As the famous line from the novel goes, if you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. Power, according to this vision, is tearing human minds apart and putting them back together again in new shapes of your own choosing. The ultimate goal is not just for Winston to obey, but for Winston to sincerely love Big Brother before he dies. It is not enough to kill him, they must purify his soul of any trace of independence so that his execution is a total victory for the system. This part of the book is especially harsh because it explores the psychology of breaking a person. Room 101, where each prisoner faces their worst fear, represents the point where human integrity is shattered. For Winston, that fear is rats. Faced with the possibility of rats devouring his face, Winston commits the final betrayal. He screams for them to do it to Julia, not him. In that moment, his spirit is broken forever. He has placed his own survival above the only person he loved. Orwell's lesson is bleak. Under enough pressure and pain, there is no loyalty that cannot be destroyed. The individual is fragile, and the state has the means to exploit that fragility to its ultimate consequences. This forces us to look toward our own era and consider the current relevance of these ideas. We often hear that we live in an Orwellian society, but what does that really mean in the 21st century? Technology and modern sociology experts point out that while we do not have a centralized big brother in the form of a visible dictator, we have built a system of voluntary surveillance. We carry trackers in our pockets, share our most intimate thoughts on digital platforms, and feed algorithms that know more about us than we know about ourselves. The surveillance of 1984 was external and coercive. Ours is internal and seductive. The connection to neuroscience is also fascinating. Today we know that the brain is plastic and that constant exposure to certain types of information can alter our neural pathways. The bombardment of fake news, extreme polarization, and cancel culture can be seen as modern versions of the 2 minutes hate, that daily ritual in which the citizens of Oceania gather in front of screens to scream at the enemy of the state, Emmanuel Goldstein. The purpose of the hate is not to destroy the enemy but to unify the group through a common foe. Currently, social networks often act as echo chambers that amplify this type of behavior, where attacking the other becomes a way of reaffirming one's own identity and group belonging. Similarly, the idea of the disappearance of privacy that Orwell explored with telescreens, devices that could not be turned off and captured both sound and image, has manifested today in the attention economy. It is no longer just about being watched to be punished, but about being watched to predict and manipulate our consumer and political behavior. Another point of contact with the modern world is the concept of post-truth. When O'Brien claims that reality only exists in the human mind and that the party has control over the mind, he is anticipating current discussions about how objective truth seems to be losing ground to emotional narratives and alternative realities. If a political leader can deny obvious facts and their followers accept it because it fits their worldview, we are operating under a form of doublethink. Distrust in the media, in science, and in institutions creates a vacuum that power can fill with its own version of the facts. Orwell's warning is that freedom begins with the ability to say that 2 + 2 = 4. If that fundamental freedom is taken away, everything else collapses. It is a passionate defense of empiricism and objective truth as the only ground where freedom can grow. In considering the legacy of 1984, we should not see it as a work of absolute pessimism, but as a call to eternal vigilance. Orwell shows us the worst possible scenario not to convince us that it is inevitable, but so that we recognize the symptoms before the process becomes irreversible. The novel is a reminder that democracy and freedom are not natural states for humanity, but fragile constructions that require a conscious effort to maintain. The deconstruction of characters like Winston teaches us that the most important resistance is internal, keeping a clear mind and a heart that does not renounce empathy even when the entire system pushes in the opposite direction. Winston's tragedy is not just his capture, but his spiritual defeat. The fact that at the end of the novel he feels happy while sitting in the Chestnut Tree Cafe, having finally learned to love Big Brother, is the author's most devastating blow. It is the death of the individual before the death of the body. To understand the magnitude of this work as narratological critics, we must appreciate how Orwell uses simple language to describe complex horrors. He does not need great rhetorical flourishes because the reality he describes is so brutal that any adornment would be superfluous. His style is direct, almost journalistic, giving it a terrifying sense of truth. This technique of dirty realism immerses us in the precariousness of life in London, with its Victory gin that tastes like nitric acid and its cigarettes that fall apart in your hands. The sensory setting is key for the reader to feel the claustrophobia of a world where there is no corner that is not watched, nor a thought that is truly private. The symbolism of objects also plays a fundamental role. The glass paperweight with a piece of coral inside that Winston buys represents the past, a fragment of useless beauty from a world that no longer exists. When the paperweight shatters during Winston and Julia's arrest, it symbolizes the final end of their hopes and the fragility of memory in the face of brute force. It is vital to understand that 1984 is not just a book about politics. It is a book about the human condition under extreme pressure. It asks us what is left of us when our past, language, love, and truth are taken away. Orwell's answer is disturbingly honest. Very little remains. and that little bit is what we must protect at all costs. The work resonates in pop culture in infinite ways, from reality shows that have trivialized the name Big Brother to movies, songs, and other novels that have drawn from its dystopic atmosphere. But beyond the superficial references, the core of the work remains a profound interrogation of the nature of power. Why do human beings seek to dominate others? Is a society not based on hierarchy and control even possible? Orwell gives us no easy answers. Instead, he forces us to look into the abyss and decide if we are going to allow the future to become that boot stamping on a human face. This reflection leads us to the final stretch of our analysis, where we must consider the relevance of the Orwellian message in the very fabric of our digital society. The ease with which digital files can be deleted, videos altered by artificial intelligence, and history rewritten in real time on the internet is a technological manifestation of Winston's work at the Ministry of Truth. If we cannot trust what we see and hear, the foundation of our shared reality erodes. Psychologists from prestigious universities have warned that the loss of a shared reality leads to social fragmentation and vulnerability to authoritarian figures who promise order in exchange for obedience. Today's Big Brother does not have to be a single person. It can be a system of incentives, a network of algorithms, or an invisible social pressure that pushes us toward conformity and silence. Self-censorship, motivated by the fear of social disapproval or job loss, is perhaps the most subtle and effective form of thought control that Orwell foresaw. Because of all this, reading 1984 remains an act of resistance in itself. It teaches us to be skeptical of the language of power, to value the importance of history, and to defend the right to privacy and independent thought. Winston Smith's struggle, though it ends in tragedy, serves as a map of the minds on the road to the future. The work is a monument to the importance of intellectual integrity and a warning about how easy it is to lose it if we are not careful. As we close the pages of this book or finish this journey through its depths, we are left with a sense of urgency. Freedom of thought is not something possessed once and for all. It is something earned every day through education, critical analysis, and the courage to hold on to the truth even when it is unpopular. At the end of this journey through George Orwell's universe, we realize that 1984 is much more than a date or a title. It is a reminder of our own vulnerability and of the amazing capacity of the human mind for both creation and destruction. Literature, at its best, serves to wake us from our lethargy and force us to face uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the world we have built. George Orwell, with his sharp pen and unshakable gaze, gave us a tool to defend our humanity. It is up to us to use it wisely. Winston Smith's story is the story of what happens when we stop asking questions, when we accept the lie because it is more comfortable than the struggle, and when we allow hatred to replace reason. May his literary sacrifice serve as our shield, and may we never forget that as long as we can say that 2 + 2 = 4, there is hope for freedom. I hope this deep deconstruction has provided you with a new perspective on this masterpiece and inspires you to continue questioning the power structures that surround us. Thank you very much for joining me in this extensive and detailed analysis. Until the next time we dive together into the depths of great literature.